Um, this is usually observed around the 15th, but it's also true that most Buddhist ceremonies originally began with the full moon. So all the observations were done with the full moon. So we're kind of close to that because the full moon was on my birthday, which was Saturday. So here we are. How auspicious, right? Yeah. So the original title of this talk was the both and of a human being. But I found a phrase in French that I thought was cooler. And so if any of you speak French? If you do, please be graceful. Coincé, entre, deux, mondes. Coincé, entre, deux, mondes. Have you heard of it? It's not quite as well known as joie de vivre and some of the others, but the French have a way of putting things together that I like. And it means to be stuck between two worlds. To be stuck between two worlds. So what does that mean? So the thing about the Great Nirvana, the Parinirvana, is that it's addressing both worlds. And it's the idea that we live in two worlds. One is the world of time and space, and the other, well, you can call it whatever you like, infinite, eternal, whatever you desire. And the idea is that human beings are basically amphibious, and that we live in both worlds at the same time. Now, until we have our own experience of awakening, and that can come gradually through study, through practice. Sometimes it famously comes on people like a lightning bolt. I think it's more the other way. But we come to this understanding that we do live in both worlds, but we no longer feel stuck. And that's the main message, I guess, I hope that I can share tonight, is that we want to be in both worlds in balance. And the thing about the Nirvana is, and this ceremony and this liturgy and this story, I mean, most of you probably know the story, right? Shakyamuni eats some bad barbecue. Was it on purpose? Was it an accident? We don't know. But he realizes that he's been poisoned. And so Ananda and some of the others, he says, look, make sure you don't eat any of this stuff. And don't blame Chandra. You know, he wasn't condemning him. And he said, make sure you bury it so no animals eat it. And then he said, it's time for me to go. And then he went off to Kapilavastu, and it said that he laid down between two solid trees, laid down on his right side, and after a period of time, he died. So that part of it is very, I think I loved about it, it was so common, right? He gets food poisoning and dies. This great mythical hero. And I think for me, the thing that comes across from that part of the story is that he was a human being. He didn't have some grand death. His death was quite ordinary. And so that part of his story is the part that we live in most of the time. I think our attention, our consciousness has been conditioned to live in that time. And the idea of another reality, I mean, lots of folks don't even entertain the idea of such a thing, let alone know it. But for Shakyamuni the Buddha, it was a reality. Now, there were various names given to this reality. Some of them were quite, arcane, and others were very sort of useful in a practical way. So the word nirvana was used a lot to talk about this other world or this other place that we live in. The true country, the pure land, was another name for nirvana. But make no mistake about it, despite the sort of redaction of some contemporary Buddhists who practice not so much exegesis but eisegesis. Do you know what the difference is? Eisegesis means you read back into the text. Exegesis means you try to find out what they were trying to say at that time. And there's no doubt that the Buddha taught there is an unborn and undying reality of which we are all a part. But we have gone through a process of development, which we call the skandic stages. And this has caused us to believe that this is the only reality. And so when we live in that, then the world really, I think, is described, if we're honest, a veil of tears. Everything that we want, we may never get. Everything that we have and is precious to us, we won't be able to hold on to. And the things that we don't want will be ever present. And so this part of life, if we see it that way, it's not much fun. And it's filled with the potential for suffering. And so it's understandable why people act the way they do. If they believe that's all there is, what's the point? I've always wondered why a nihilist is nice. Is it convention? Is it culture? What's the point? I don't know about you guys. I'm certainly not a misanthrope, but sometimes I think Sartre was right. Other people are hell. I can tell you when I was coming back from Miami, and there was 150 people in line and 2 people at the kiosk, and our plane was a half an hour away. I agreed with Sartre. But that's the world that most of us live in without realizing there is another. And that world lives here too. It's not like it's somewhere else. It's available to us through our own minds. It's available to us. And we can experience it now. When we see things through the eyes of separation, it makes perfect sense that people are the way they are. Nothing surprises me. When you see things from the eyes of separation, where you feel like you're this lone flesh bag floating through space and nothing matters, what do? I mean, I've always found it a mystery. Why would you be nice? Why wouldn't you just try to get away with everything you can? Because nothing matters. And we're all a little bit inherently selfish anyway. Why not go for it? Why not have a good time? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. No one gives me a good answer. I've never met Richard Dawkins. I know several people that know him well. I would like to ask him that question. What's the point? Why? Why would you do that? Why would you try to be good? Why don't you try to get everything you can? That would make sense. When we awaken or we see things through the eyes of what the Buddha called oneness, that was another word for nirvana, then it changes everything. When I realize I'm not alone, when I realize I'm not just dependent or independent, that I am interdependent, when I realize there is nothing in me that is separate or has ever been separate, when I realize it's a delusion for me to think that I've ever been separate, that I always have belonged, but I just haven't been able to see it. And when I belong, when I see things through the eyes of oneness, it changes everything, you know? And it changes things in that moment. My wife will tell you, I don't suffer fools easily. I need the Dharma daily, because otherwise I'm a bit of I can be a mean jerk. I don't take crap. Our dojo motto is,
cause no harm, take no shit.
yeah. And I'm more comfortable fighting. I've grown up fighting. That was my life when I was a young man. I think that's why I got along so well in the prison system.
Sensei, I don't think that they heard the dojo motto in the back.
Oh, they didn't hear the dojo motto in the back?
Yeah,
Cause no harm, take no shit.
But I'm in that line with my wife, and because of the practice, because of that, even though I'm complaining to her because I found that's a very nice way for me to not get really angry, just talk to my wife and all my nonsense, and she's so good about listening to my nonsense. But that allows me to process everything I'm thinking and feeling, because I know it's just my ego self. I know it's not my true self. But in that moment, even there, because of that, even though there's this agitated part, there's this other part who sees that I am one with all these beings, not separate from them. And then what happens is magical. I don't get as irritated and angry and upset, and I actually experience compassion. And it's not because I'm special, but it's because the practices of awakening allow me to experience that which is my true nature. And that's how I see things, and then I don't see things the same way anymore. So how do we do this? How do we live this life, this amphibious life of the eternal and the temporal? Well, by giving ourselves to it completely. Because the reality is, this transient, contingent life, you know, it's going to follow the second laws of thermodynamics. You know what that is? Everything falls apart. It's scientific. David Byrne from Talking Heads said it best. Everything falls apart. And so I want to cultivate that which is not bound, the boundless. And that is within me. And so how do I practice it? Here's how I practice it. Honestly, I love all the practices we've put together. 4 directions. They're wonderful. They're beautiful. They work really well, particularly the 4 questions. Amazing. But honestly, my real heart's practice is this. When my son was little, I mean real little, when I would come home from being away, he would run at me full blast. He would run at me full blast and hit me. And that's what I do. I run at it full blast. I give myself completely to it. I don't hold back. I give it up every day, in every way. And that is my main practice. And when I do this, then everything else works beautifully. Meditation is serene. The mindfulness practices are so laser good. But it starts with that foundation of refuge. Totally taking refuge, totally running like he did, full blast into it. One of the wisest men I've ever known was one of my mentors, the Reverend Dr. Alfred Bloom. Look him up. He was a major scholar from Harvard, a Buddhist priest, and a wonderful man. And he had a phrase that he would say over and over, almost like a mantra. He would say, Tony, I'm just a foolish being embraced by boundless compassion. And when I would ask him to talk about that compassion, he would say, it's easy, hold your breath. So I held my breath, good student. Then he didn't tell me to take a breath. But guess what I had to do? I had to take a breath. And then he would laugh. And he'd say, now, you're breathing. So where does that come from? Where does the oxygen come from? Well, the oxygen comes from the trees. Without that, I couldn't last a second. Where do the trees come from? They come from this earth. Where does this earth come from? Well, it just happens to sit in the Goldilocks place in the solar system. Not too hot, not too cold. And even the entire galaxy of our Milky Way sits in a Goldilocks place. Scientists argue all day long about, is this an accident or was it on purpose? Because it is so unusual. But that's what he would say. He would say, be aware of all these things that are constantly helping you in ways that you could have never imagined. So his practice was gratitude, gratefulness. And so that's what I think of. I think of the idea of every day taking refuge. The first thing I do when I wake up is take refuge. The last thing I do before I go to sleep is take refuge. And my whole day, I've often paraphrased St. Paul. I don't know if you ever heard the phrase he said once, one should learn to pray without ceasing. I've paraphrased it to one should learn to meditate without ceasing. What does that mean? Doesn't mean I'm sitting here on a cushion all day. It means that the way I'm seeing things is from that place, from that center, from that peaceful, calm, clear, connected, creative place. And my lips, there's a mantra on my lips almost every hour. Almost every hour. And so that's how you do it. And it's really not as hard as people think. But it's allowing the ego self to relax, to run full blast at the true self. Experiencing that embrace. Now, I think there are some, this is the end of it, I think there are some creatures that get this. Like people say to me, well, what's a good example of an enlightened being? Who should I imitate? And I always point to my cat. One of the big thrills for me when I wasn't working down in Key West a few weeks back was I wanted to go see Hemingway's home. And he loved cats, and cats rule there. And they have unusual six-toed ones too. And I think of that, I think of a cat's life. And so that's my example. If I was to ask, if somebody asked me what's the best example, I would say watch a cat. What's it do? It's constantly sleeping and resting. Or it's filled with furious activity, and then it's back to that. There is a saying, a legend, that when Shakyamuni was dying, everybody started gathering. People came from all over. They heard about it. People would make their their sojourn there, and apparently he hung around long enough for many of them to gather. And it says that even the trees and the animals also gathered. And then when he passed, everybody was upset, weeping, crying. And guess what the only creature was that didn't? The cats. They gathered too. They curled up beside him and just went to sleep. So that's the message. You can't live in one world and not the other. But you can balance them. So when I get bad news, like learning that my beloved brother, who's much younger than me, has to have open heart surgery. Just found out on my birthday. Those are the things that come at us, right? Everything's great. And then in New York Minute, something happens, and there it is. And if I was trying to survive and just deal with this from the ego side of things, I'd be a mess. But what do? I really run fast and headlong. I don't even open my eyes and look. I just run. Right into the arms of my true nature. And it's from that place I think we really understand. Once you start to practice this, once you start to open your eyes to it, you see it everywhere. You see it everywhere. I hope you found that useful.